This lecture is being recorded for the Forum Network, a joint venture of PBS, NPR, and WGBH, and may be available on the Forum Network at forum-network.org and from other affiliated websites. If and when the video becomes available online, we will inform everyone on our email list. So if you are not on our email list, this would be a great night to become a NASTR member, or to be on our email list, or both. You can even follow us on Facebook. Before I introduce our speaker tonight, who's waiting patiently, it's only appropriate, I think, that we pause for a moment, since this is, of course, the eve of the observance of the 99th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide. Most of us here tonight who are Armenians, I suspect, have had our lives touched directly by this event, whether a parent or grandparent or other relative we knew, or someone we could never know, or an acquaintance. We all know that after the passage of 99 years, very few survivors are left. It's inevitable that the direct memory of the genocide will fade because time passes on. But the importance of the genocide and the need for awareness, understanding, and justice will not fade. Tonight we'll hear about one effort to understand, to document, to make people aware, and in so doing, to bring some small measure of justice for those who were killed. NASTR is proud to support this kind of work, as we've done for decades, and as we will continue to do as long as we exist. Please then, before we proceed, let us just have a moment of silence to remember those known and dear to us, and those unknown to us who were killed or who suffer. Well, it's hard for me to believe, but it was 8.5 years ago, in November 2005, that I stood here and introduced Steve Kurkjian, who gave on that evening a talk entitled "Kiss My Children's Eyes, A Search for Answers to the Armenian Genocide Through One Remarkable Photograph." At that time, Steve presented a fascinating and thoughtful exploration of what he had learned and what he thought might be known about this extraordinary photograph. Looking back now, and knowing the incredible amount of material that has been poured over since that time, that I'm sure many of us didn't even know existed then, frankly, I'm dumbstruck at the amount of work that Steve has done. So tonight, Steve Kurkjian revisits the photograph and will share with us much of what he has learned over the past decade. Steve Kurkjian is the son of a genocide survivor from the Gessaria region. He was a long-time investigative reporter for the Boston Globe, more than 40 years. He was one of 3 founding members of the Globe's investigative spotlight team. He was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for local investigative specialized reporting twice, in 1972 for exposing corruption at Somerville, and in 1980 for coverage of Boston's transit system. He also shared another 3rd Pulitzer Prize in 2003 for public service for investigating sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. In addition, his reporting has won him and the Globe more than 24 other national and regional journalism awards. He has served on NASTR's board of directors since 2003, and for many of those years, he's been a member of the board's executive committee. He's a friend and a familiar face here, and we're really thrilled to have him here to speak. Steve, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mark. Learn how to do this as well. And it's so wonderful to see so many friendly and familiar faces of family and friends from this community and my Globe community here with us tonight. And as Mark says, I've spent a lot of time, far too much time, in trying to find the secrets behind this photograph. There are several of you who are here tonight I first need to acknowledge for helping me and working with me on this enterprise. First, Mark Mamagonian, who's our academic director here at NASA. He guided me every step of the way. He shared my enthusiasm for the research, and he also the determination to get the right questions addressed and answered. Not only did he steer me to the right archives and the right scholars, but he also had me asking the right questions. Meticulously edited the final draft, probably 3 or 4 days before the presses ran in the Armenian Weekly. I wanted to have the article here for you tonight. We'll have it in a couple of weeks for Mark's lecture in early May. And if you can't wait to read it, you'll get on the Armenian Weekly website and you'll see it there. 700 lines, which is a long article for me. Usually I'm at 200, 250. But this one needed more space, more time, more words to tell the story fully. Ruth Tamashian, Executive Director of Project SAVE, whose work is so important for cataloging Armenian life, whether it's in historic Armenia or here in America. Her archives showed me the importance of this photograph. That really, it was the first time that we had a photograph that showed men who were martyred and identified them. And as I say in the piece, so as a result, we could trace not only their deaths, but also their lives in Gessaria and their lives in the aftermath. Their families as they came and survived. And Ruth introduced me to Arpi Davis, who served as my translator throughout. She's an extraordinary woman who came to the United States with her family and went to college here. Her knowledge of the Armenian experience is deep as well as fierce. And she was driven as much as I was to tell the story. How many times I would receive a call, I would give her a sheath of papers this thick for her to go through and try to find some little detail about life in Gessaria that led to the genocide and how these men got put together and how they got tried and what happened to them. And she would say, "Steve, I found a pearl." And she knew of my interest in those pearls, and stringing those pearls together, we came up with this article. This was not an easy story to do alone. Ultimately, it's a wretched story. Death, deprivation, destruction, ultimately defeat and denial, which we have all suffered one way or another. As a journalist, we're tested. This exterior of reserve and arm's length in dealing with tragedy, that wore away very quickly. But her determination, my determination in getting to the right documents, served us well throughout. Once the photograph was put in my hands, several tasks laid in front of us, proving that the men who were shown in it had in fact been martyred in the genocide. Authenticating their existence, authenticating the existence of the photograph. Where had it come from? Who had taken it? Where was it first published? Why had the story behind this photograph never been told? First, a word of how the photograph came into my hands. I had joined NASA in 2004, 2005, and Elaine Patapanian, who's been a long-time member with her husband Ed, had heard, and she knew of my background as an investigative reporter, and she asked me if I would come visit her on a Saturday morning, and I did. And I was full-fledged reporter at the Globe and doing one investigation after another. And Elaine put the photograph in my hand, and she said to me, "Steve, this photograph here shows my grandfather, and this is he here." Wow. And she said, and I said, "Oh, isn't that interesting?" And she said, "Yes, we know very little about how he died. All I have," and so I said, "Oh, how interesting." But as I said, I was fully involved with my work at the Globe. At that point, I was getting immersed into the work to try to help uncover or locate the stolen paintings from the Gardner Museum. And I knew that this was going to be a long-term effort to do justice to this story. So I said to her, well, maybe I could do something about your interest in looking to try to find the whereabouts of what happened here, and what happened to your grandfather. And she said, well, I do have a document. Newspaper reporters love documents. I said, what document is that, Elaine? And she showed me this document. And this is a document written July 1915. And for those of you who can read Armenian, she translated it for me. And it told of her father, of her grandfather, having been taken from the prison and now was on a long march outside of Ghesaria, it's a city in central Turkey, and was nearing Sebastia. And he was worried about going to Sivas because there had been rumors of killing fields there. And at the end he said, I guess it's down here, or here, kiss my children's eyes. Oh. I was hooked. I knew then that that there was a story here of a person who felt like I felt towards children, and his life deserved to be researched, and his death deserved to be fully explored, and what happened to him and what happened to his family. So I thanked her for it. I took this document from her, and I went to an editor or two around the globe, and I said, what's the story here? And they said, well, if you can authenticate the photograph, which is who took it, what happened to it, why it's never been fully explored, maybe there's a story behind it. So I went to Mark and I said, Mark, can we do this? And Mark was very interested and said, yeah, I think you could do it, but it's going to take some time. So, but that started us. The document turned out to be, the photograph turned out to be as compelling as I went deeper and deeper into trying to find some key questions about what happened to these men. So tonight I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I found, how I entered the mystery of this photograph, why I kept going for so long, and what I learned. Armenian, go back to the photograph. Armenian was one of 1,100 Armenian men who lived in Ghesaria, who were tried by a Turkish military tribunal there. It was a series of kangaroo courts that took place for the early part in middle to late May 1915. And in June of 1915, the hangings began. That we knew from some documentation. But how the military tribunals had turned into the hangings remained a mystery. Until I started to try to find out who had written anything about Ghesaria. And I found a man named Vahan Almayan had written in 1920-21 a series of articles. This is he here. A series of articles in an Armenian publication, Yeretzad Hayastan. And I found the publication on reel-to-reels in Chicago for whatever. I guess the Hayastan was published in Chicago. And I got page after page Xerox, brought it to Arpi, and Arpi began the translation. And in that publication, Almayan told about the tribunals had been set, and the tribunals had ordered long sentences on these men who had been tried pretty much on two charges. One, possession of weapons, and second, membership in either of two political parties, Armenian political parties, both of which, the verdict said, had urged independence for Armenia, revolt of the Armenian community, and aligning itself with the East, with the Tsarist Russia to the east. So there was a sense of foreboding that this tribunal was coming forward with. If you had guns, or if you had membership in these two, either of these two political parties, that was going to get you a sentence. Interesting enough, there were two men who were acquitted of the charges. Armenian was one of them. But Armenian was put on a death march in July of 1915 and never heard from again. Of the 1,100 men who were sentenced by the tribunal, 900 were killed, either by hanging or other death marches. Some to the east in Sivas, and others to the southwest. The Mayan's writings were not the only ones I was able to find. There was a second man named, let me just talk about Armenian again. Excuse me, Mayan again. Mayan's writing this in 1965. The first time, couldn't figure out why at this point, we knew the photograph appeared in 1965. And here it was in page 352. If you come to my house, in your house you have a Bible that's laid out in the sacred place. In my house, there's this photograph that's laid up in the sacred place. This in page 352 of a book that was published in 1965, 50 years after the genocide. There was a memorial book that was put out in Beirut that included this photograph. So there is another mystery. How could it have taken 50 years to have this photograph published? Mark and I would go through volume after volume after volume, trying to find some indication of this photograph showing up before. The best we could come up with, and this is when I knew it was time to quit and go to the typewriter and write this story, was we heard of a wall calendar put out in Damascus by the Gesaritsi Memorial Committee that was in Damascus at this point in the 1930s. And it was said, the second author said, that in that memorial calendar there were 5 photographs from the genocide in Gesaria. Well, I said to Mark, there is no way that we're going to be able to find a wall calendar that was published in Damascus in 1930. So I knew at that point, it's time for me to write the story about this photograph and who the people are. The one documentation that proved vital to my research, to our research, was a military tribunal newspaper that came out the week between the sentence and the hangings beginning. And that's this, no one here reads Ottoman Turkish, but we had this translated. And in these pages are the verdicts of about 50 men. 40 of them are shown in my photograph and named in the photograph. So this was proof positive to me that the men whose names were in the, beneath the photograph, the names were on the photograph, were the same men, these are the community leaders of Gesaria, were the same men who were tried by this military tribunal. And that meant they had been martyred. Does each of the names, each of the faces in that photograph, does that mean they were all martyred? My belief is yes, but I don't have for all 50. I have for 40 odd of them. I have that they were martyred. But that was proof enough for me that the importance of this photograph was real. That now we had proof that here was a group of 50 men who had suffered the ultimate fate of the genocide. I was able now to start looking for their kin. And as I started to work the phone, which is newspaperman's expression, to pick up the phone and try to connect with people, my story began to shift. My focus of the story began to shift. It went from the legalistic determination of the unfairness, the brutality involved here, to the consequence to the families. It's something that each of us in this room have faced. And as I reached out to people and found people who had relatives who were in this photograph who didn't know even that their relative, that their grandfather, their granduncle, in one case their father, was in this photograph. It was very real, and quickly sent them the photograph and then began to get the information from them about their kin. And that's when it struck me again. Our story is made real by this photograph. And by that I mean, we survived. Not only did we survive, but we thrived. So not only did the intent fail to eliminate us from the face of historic Armenia, from the face of the world, but we were able to thrive because look at us. The people whom I spoke with, whom I was able to reach through my research, included Vahan Kurkjian, who's no relation. This is he here. Vahan Kurkjian. Now, again, this is the leadership, Armenian leadership of Gessaria. And Vahan, who's the dean and teacher at a college, regarded as the most educated of the Armenian residents in and around Gessaria. He was hanged by a military tribunal because he was a member of the Tashnak party. Shortly before he was brought to the gallows in August 1915, he presented his most prized possession, a fountain pen, to his wife, with the instruction that she give it to the son among their three, Edward, Walter, and Harry, who turned out to be the most like him. With their mother, the three boys made it to the United States. All led successful lives, including Walter, who became a successful banker and a mayor of Merchantville, New Jersey. The pen remains a family heirloom. Connie Jajurian. We don't have Connie, okay. Connie Jajurian, not only was he killed, but also his two brothers and a brother-in-law. Connie knew what was coming. He feared what was coming. So he sent his son to the United States in the early 1900s. And the son got a job with the MTA, the Transit Authority at that point. And the union of the Transit Authority was represented by Louis Brandeis. Louis Brandeis, a pillar of American jurisprudence. Louis Brandeis helped Connie's son make out the paperwork to get Connie's widow here to the United States. So, again, that the seeds of our existence could not be wiped out. There was another, Gadabed Janjan. He was the most renowned member of the Gessaria community. Yep. They found a rifle in his house, and that was the charge they brought against him. He tried to explain to the tribunal that it had been given to him as a gift by the Turkish government. The prosecutor, however, said to him, if you were called on to use the gun, you would use it against a Turk, because you would never use it against an Armenian. As a result, you had a deadly weapon in your possession, and therefore you're convicted. Of course, the defense that in 1908, with the takeover of the Ottoman Republic by the Young Turkish Party, they allowed possession of weaponry, of weapons, of guns, of rifles by the Armenian community. It had been prohibited before, but now in 1908 they allowed them. So it was legal for him to have this gun. Yet it didn't matter to this kangaroo court. Thankfully, members of his family, including his nephew, Dr. Stephen Savajan, would emigrate to the United States. Savajan served as combat medical officer with the 4th Infantry Division that landed in Normandy in 1945 and was part of the regiment that liberated Paris. And best of all for me was the conversation I had with a 92-year-old psychiatrist in Memphis, Dr. Galabed Ayvazyan. He knew nothing about the loss of his father in Yugoslavia. I showed him a picture of a gentleman named Hagop Avsharian, who said there was a resemblance there, but he couldn't be absolutely certain that it was his father. But he said to me, now at least I am at peace in thinking that that is my father there, and he died with friends. He died with people and members of his community that he was with, and that gave him peace. And so that was important to me. That my research, turning now towards the human, was giving people some solace. So how did I come up with this photograph to work its way back into the hands of Vahan Almayan that would show up in 1965? Well, as luck would have it, it turns out it's very close by. I was going to the ribbon cutting at the Armenian Heritage Park, and who comes up to me but Alice Nakashian, friend from here, elsewhere, and Alice, Stephen, why haven't you come by my house to look at my father's photographs? I think the photographs that you're interested in, my father had in his files. Now, Alice Nakashian lives less than a mile than my parents from my parents' home, across from St. James Armenian Church on Mount Auburn Street. And I said, of course, Alice, I'll be down and I'll take a look. Turns out, what Alice had in her files was the original photograph that wound up in Vahan Almayan's files in Beirut. How did it happen? Alice's father, Haratun Nakashian, was Gesaritsi. He was born in Gesaria. He was born just at the sort of the right time, I think late 1890s. So at this time he would have been a teenager when all this was going on. So he would have recognized the faces. He was also very interested in photography. He survived the genocide because he left Gesaria early, and he had a little bit of a Middle Eastern tour, and he wound up in Egypt. And he went to work for Eastman Kodak. So he had an interest in and expertise in photographs. When he came back, he joined the Allies in sort of 1918, 1919, and he toured through through the Middle East, including throughout Turkey, as a translator. And he kept on purchasing or obtaining photographs. And one of the photographs that he obtained is this one. This is the one original. And on his own, he began to try to figure out who were these men. And that's why this is his handwriting below. And he and a good friend who passed away recently, John Garabedian, would make Xeroxes of the photograph and send it out to Armenian publications throughout the world. And it's my belief that it was through that effort that it wound up in Almayan's hands as Almayan was doing his research for the 1965 genocide memorial. And so this was this was a list that Nakashian drew up of the individuals who are shown, and he was doing this on his own. he would take the photograph to other people who might have had Gesarici roots and say, whom do you recognize here? Whom do you recognize here? And through that effort, they were able to identify about 40 or 42 of the faces in the crowd. When the photograph was taken, as you can see, the men are dressed in fairly heavy clothes. What happened here goes back to how the genocide unfolded in Gesaria. In around late January 1915, tensions were growing. Turkey was getting the worst of the war. To the west, in the Dardanelles, the British ships were beginning to bombard, bringing their bombardment into Constantinople. To the east, they had suffered a horrendous loss against the Tsar's military, and so it was a bad time for the Turkish military and the Ottoman Republic. And there was a sense of how do we get the public's fervor back on our side. And there was an intent to inflame the population against the Armenians. There was an incident in Gesaria, outside of Gesaria, where a young Armenian man had come back from the United States to Gesaria, and he had come back for the sole reason of avenging his uncle and his nephew's death, his cousin's death, who had been killed in the 1898 massacres. And no one heard about it for a day or two, except there was a Turkish man who lived in the neighborhood, and he told the authorities that there would have been an explosion in an Armenian house. That young man was in fact killed in the explosion. Well, the Turkish authorities, the Ottoman rulers, were outraged that there had been an explosion that the governor of Gesaria hadn't known about. And so they replaced him with a man named Salih Zeki. Zeki, we always think of three rulers of the Ottoman Republic. Zeki is the most brutal. He's the fourth. And this is he here, to the right. Zeki stayed on as governor. He was named as governor of Gesaria. At that point in time, a district comprised about 59,000 Armenians. And within a year and a half, there was now 6,500 Armenians. The rest had either been killed or had been set upon in the caravans south towards Aleppo. When his work was done in Gesaria, he was so effective, so brutal there, the Ottoman rulers sent him to another province, Derzur. And if there is a baleful word in our lexicon as far as the genocide, it is Derzur. The bones of Armenians who died there in the 1916-17 period can still be found, as Peter Balakian brought a crew from 60 Minutes to show. It can still be found there. And that, establishing that as a death camp, was all to the success, unfortunate success, of Salih Zeki. Salih Zeki was personally a reprehensible individual. He rallied a group of Chets, of the prisoners, said to them, listen, if you don't wipe them all out, they will come back and avenge what happened here. It will happen. They will come back and avenge. And he took a baby in his hands and killed the baby right in front of him. And he turned out to be right. We did come back. They didn't wipe us out. We did survive. And unfortunately, he lived out his life as a retiree in Baku. Let me just give a little bit of location as to where we are here. So this is Istanbul, which I'm sure some of you have been to, and Kayseri. And down here is the Derzur, headed towards Syria. It then wasn't a French protectorate there, I guess, right? But the killings here, the death there was extraordinary. And again, it was at the hands of Saliseki. So, you know, this is an important date for us, this 99th anniversary. When Arpi and I were working on this, we said, we'll do it for the 100th, do it for the 100th. And then Arpi had heart surgery, and that had taken the breath out of my sails. And then I had heart surgery, and that had laid me up for several months. So when I got my wits about me, I just sat down in search of the perfect image. We talked about what we're going to do here, and I said, I think we've got to get this story done, Arpi. And we did. We did. Last summer, I went to the typewriter and worked with several other people. Tana Akcham, an extraordinary genocide scholar at Clark University, helpful, and Vahap Gandadrian, who is the pillar of genocide research. Yet despite their intense efforts, the efforts of Mark and great organizations here at NASA, the research that goes into genocide research is, the work that goes into genocide research is incomplete. The Turkish government, as you know, has denied for years, only relented recently in opening up their archives. Only Armenia has ever funded any research into the genocide. Yet, as we all know very well, and I think the public knows, this was the first genocide of the 20th century, and had it been fully understood and fully researched when it took place or soon after, perhaps we wouldn't have had a succession of others. Yet there is some hope here. As we know, Turkey continues to deny the genocide. Today, however, Prime Minister Erdogan issued a statement of condolences to the grandchildren. That's to us. That's to me. That's to my sisters. And I took that as a first step, that I thought perhaps he understands what he took from us, what was taken from us. This sense of community was ripped away from us. You know, as I worked at the Globe, and still, I have my friends who are Irish heritage, come back from their vacations, or Italian heritage, Puerto Rican heritage, wherever, and they go to the villages of their birthrights, and they come back full of wonder of what they saw. They saw people who looked like their cousins, who looked like them in this village. And we don't have that. You know, the few of us who will go back, to find no remnants, you know, maybe we'll see a, we'll see a fierce look in the eye, or a hooked nose, or a voice that sounds familiar. But the institutions aren't there, the churches aren't there. So, and that truly troubles me. None of us are going back. None of us are going to reclaim our hillsides in Gesaria or Kili or Ezrum or Van. But we do have the right to go back and be remembered and commemorated, and have those victims of this genocide whose were buried without an Armenian memorial mass, no mass. To have that mass done for each of our beloveds. I would go back for that. And I would bring my sisters back for that. I'd bring my kids and my grandchildren back for that. Because that's where this Kurkjian family began. And that's where each of our families began. They may have taken us away from our birthright. That hallowed ground where each of us were born and where our roots were. But understand, I wrote a story 20 years ago now for the Globe that said, that was titled Roots of Sorrow, because of the sorrow that we all have suffered. But I think now that that title should be changed to not only Roots of Sorrow, but Seeds of Hope. Because your faces, your presence, your establishment in your communities has been so extraordinary that when people talk about the Armenians now, they don't just talk about the suffering of the loss, but they talk about the resilience, the success, and the presence in our community. And I think it's a testament to you, testament to us, to me, and a testament to these men here. And that's what I wanted to come true in this story. And if you read it, I think you'll see that was what, I hope you do read it. That's, I hope we'll see this comes clear. So thank you very much for coming, and I appreciate it.
To my grandmother's house. Her name is in them. I have seen the house in Bandırma. It's a beautiful house. I also have the deed to the house, the lands that she has out in thing. After the first genocide, when she went back to Bandırma, she was there a few days, and this Kurd or somebody brought juvals of wheat or whatever it was and said, "I've been working your land, this is your share."
That's wonderful.
She said we had Toren and everything else. So why shouldn't we claim it? I've seen the house. It's a beautiful house.
I'm just saying, in practical terms, we're not going back. I would celebrate you to go back. That would be wonderful.
I was even thinking of offering to buy the house. And everybody said, why bother?
It's yours.
It's on the Marmara Sea. It's not down here. It's up here. Nobody ever goes and visits there. It's in Giligya or whatever, Byzantium.
In my calculation, it's a hell of a story. And I invite you to go back and establish yourself, and one way or the other.
I have first cousins that were born and brought up in Istanbul.
There you go.
So they are now living in New Jersey, but they speak the language and everything. I haven't said anything to them because the deeds were given to me.
Fine.
And then I can pass them on to whatever I
Well,
want.
I didn't say anything, but I am a lawyer as well. So I will take your case and we'll go back and we'll reestablish that claim.
Stephen, why was this group, what was that picture taken for? Why were they...
Good question, Sarah. This picture was taken, my belief is, this picture was taken in around the time of Sally Zeki taking over. And why he wanted it taken was, he wanted to show the rulers, the Ottoman rulers, the three of them, that we've got the community here. These are the businessmen. We've got them. These are their faces, and we're going to keep an eye on them. But it wasn't taken. It showed up in a book called The Armenian Massacres, and it said an hour or two before their deaths. There's no way. Their deaths began in July of 1915. They were rounded up by Sally Zeki for the purpose of to show to the rulers, we've got the community. This was a triggering event, this explosion. And what he wanted to show to his rulers, that I'm in control here. Here are the Armenians who are the members of this community. And then they put together the apparatus of trying them and then killing.
I think it says in Armenian, if I read that, it's in front of the jail.
Yeah. That's it may be from the, I don't know exactly where. I'm told it was a jail called Kapualti, Kapualti, which is near the Kale, the fortress. Has anybody else been to Caesarea here? So you know that Kale is that fortress, which is right in the center of town. And my belief is that this was in that area. The hangings took place in a place called the Coal Pits, C-O-A-L pits, and that as well is near the center of town. Unfortunately, there are very few maps of Caesarea. I went twice. I went once with Armin Arroyan, and then once I went on my own to it was taken to various places. You can still, there is still a section of this town, of the village, of the city that looks like Armenian stone houses. There are very, very few Armenians there. St. Gregory of the Illuminated Church is still there. It's a fabulous big church, and the archdiocese, whatever, the church leader in Istanbul sends a priest there once a month in order that the church itself not be deemed abandoned by the Turkish authorities and therefore taken over. They're very worried about the church being taken over because it's the last remnant of the Armenian life and in Gesaria. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Stephen, for running all over the world to get the story. It just so happens, I guess Armenian Weekly has been putting up the baptism records.
Yes, right.
And that's the only church that they survived in.
Right, right.
And I didn't know if there was some tie-in, maybe.
I've looked at the names. I've had some of my names are there. They have the baptism records. Their families are in the baptism records.
George is here. I'm sure he can fill it.
George, stand.
Yeah, I'm the one translating those records and continuing to translate them for 19 pages from 1902 to 1915. I've done 1902 through 1907 thus far, plus 1914 and 15, which I did specifically for the weekly. It is the only apostolic church records from outside of Istanbul from prior to the genocide that I know that have persisted to this day. I mean, there are some other records, mostly Catholic Armenian records, but from Gesaria, I can just tell you that when you talk about the districts of Gesaria, yeah, finding a map that shows you where those districts were, which was about 20 of them, that were in the city, is very difficult to figure out the naming of where they were. But what I can tell you is that some of the records have been published from 1800s, 1830s, the Ottoman census records. And I have found some of the people baptized, the family name was unusual enough that I could safely say that it was the same family for 100 years had lived in the same district of Gesaria, because I found that same family name in the 1830 Ottoman records as was baptized in the 1900s. So it's an interesting thing. I mean, what Steve's done is phenomenal. And hopefully as I go through and translate more of them, they'll find more names. It's all in a database, so it'll be easier for you to do your search, Steve.
I mean, Harry Parsikian is not here today. He's in Istanbul, I guess. But Harry will talk about Efkara as his. I mean, Harry comes from Watertown, South. He knows everyone in South Boston knows him. But Harry will talk about Efkara like I'll talk about Codman Square in Dorchester, or you'll talk about the neighborhoods of Eastern Watertown. I mean, they're in his blood, and that's what I would hope that would ultimately be done for genocide research, not solely as a legalistic enterprise, was an enterprise to recapture what our families were like back then, how they interacted, because we're the same people, you know, and to be able to capture that back then, and to know who their neighbors were. My sisters and I were trying to figure out how my father had an incredible cleft chin. Remember, Kirk Douglas had an extraordinary. My father had a cleft chin that would make his look like a sunspot. Where did this come from? You know, that's my father's. That's mine. That's my birthright, and we can't figure it out. To be able to call up someone who lived in that village and knew his father or his mother there in eastern Turkey, and say to them, what was life like back then? It's, that's what...
Kushamadyan is
again?
Kushamadyan is trying to recreate.
Right, that's what trying to recreate what life was like back then for our ancestors. And I've done some extraordinary, had extraordinary success in my career as a newspaper reporter for the Boston Globe, but this gives me such sense of fulfillment like nothing else. There's something calling me that I, that perked my ear up, and so.
I think you mentioned you identified 40 plus other people.
Their name, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious, how many of those have descendants in the United States now?
I don't think anybody.
Nobody.
I think that they were all. My belief is I haven't found one.
Okay.
There was one man who, as well, was acquitted, named Kurkjian. Kurkjian, I spent weeks trying to find him because it seemed to me, well, Armenian was put on a death march and he was acquitted. Maybe Kurkjian, because he was acquitted of the charges, would have survived. I found a Kurkjian who died, lived here, and he would have been the son. And he died, I think, in Needham. And there was another family who was related who was in Rio de Janeiro. And then talk about valiant efforts here. I contacted them. They did not know of the first name. So my sense is that if we found someone who survived, that would be great. But I don't think...
Descendants. How many of them have descendants who live in the United States?
Of the descendants, I found probably 15 descendants.
In the U.S.?
In the U.S., mostly in Canada, in the U.S., yes.
What I love about this entire presentation, and I'm not saying we're an older crowd, I was just with a bunch of children yesterday, and I think we passed the tipping point because those kids delighted into their past. And most of them have learned Armenian, unlike my generation. But you showed that the passage of time means nothing,
Right.
and that everything is possible,
Right.
and that it could start in America, even though we had Haig Demonian here from the Genocide Museum,
Right.
and a retired librarian in Providence's main library found something he was looking for,
Right.
and you found something here, NASA, and I'm so glad that George is sitting
Right.
behind
I know, I
me,
don't know
because
it.
George
Right. I know.
went back to our
I know.
ancestral village and he took his daughter, that generation, physically introduced her, physically did what you said we should do.
Right.
And I'm just so...
But understand, we are fulfilling the obligation. We have an obligation here of support for of Armenian institutions. And I'm not just saying towards genocide research, but those institutions that preserve and honor the Armenian history, Armenian legacy. We need to pass that support onto our children and our grandchildren. Because it's, our parents, preserved. They're the ones who are the survivors, our parents. And now it's on us to pass on what it means to us, looking back at these people and our ancestors from back there, but also our parents who struggled to give us an extraordinary life. And as you know, each of us has our own blessing that was provided to us by our parents, the survivor generation. Now we've got to take that as an obligation and pass that on. And this was, part of the reason. This is what I do, when I meet somebody, I ask them a question and they'll tell me something not about the Armenians, and I say, oh, that sounds interesting. There must be a story there. If you're a doctor, you say, there must be an ailment there. If there's a lawyer, there might be a case there. For me, there must be a story there. Let me give you a little bit more.
That was just wonderful. I've been to Nasser a lot, but I think it's because I've talked to you once before, and I work for Chronicle, so just having a outlook, from a journalist, and I can see how fulfilling it is for you. So how much, when you did all through the research, and when you talked to some of the descendants and stuff, how much more visual material do you have, as far as, could you do more presentations that are visual like this?
No. This is the best this is the best I got. Elaine Patapanian gave me probably that meeting that she sat me down and read this to me, that was 2/3 of my, and that was like within 2 hours. And Ed talked to me about his family and how they had gone back and joined the regiment to try to free Armenia. But I wasn't as interested in that as I was interested. I was interested in a man who felt like me. Kiss my children's eyes. You know, that's not even an Armenian expression, right? That's an Arabic expression, right? Turkish expression, right? But he uses it as the ending of his letter. That's, you know, how to be able to it's such a horrific moment to capture such a beautiful image. Kissing his children's eyes. Hooked me. Nancy?
Yes, I just wanted to, what strikes me also is that the men look so serious.
So somber.
And they're looking right
Yep.
at the photographer.
Right.
Do you know anything about the photographer?
Yeah, good for you. Nancy, I believe it's a man named Gulbank Chechekian. And Chechekian lived in Gisaria. He was a photographer. His father-in-law was a photographer. He survived. He had a shop for the hangings. A gendarme came to his studio and said, "Don't close up. Come with me. We want you to take photographs of the hangings." And I'm told he took. I don't have the photographs of the hangings. I'm told he took photographs of the hangings in Gisaria, which took place, you know, like a day or two after the verdicts came down. Gulbenkian did survive the genocide. He went on to Beirut, and he had a successful studio there and became one of the Prime Minister's principal photographer. And Gulbank Chechek, he changed his name to Gulbank. And but Chechekian was the family name. And when I first spoke in 2005, I had his son here, and his son said, yes, that's what my father said, that he had been rousted from his studio and told to take photographs of the hangings. My belief is he took this photograph, but it's just my belief because there's no there's no credit line to so.
Steve, not having looked very closely with a magnifying glass or anything, how would you describe the emotions on their faces?
Oh, it's serious. I think I started with seriousness, a sense of doom. I mean, there's one man here. Look at this. This man here. You know, he's looking to the heavens. But there is not a smile. This is a Turkish gendarme, and he looks like, you know, like any other cop doing a detail. You know, come on. So he's just sort of passing the time of day. But there's not a smile, there's not a relaxed face amongst them. They know bad things are ahead.
I was going to ask, do you have the names of the additional 1,100 people who were?
There is a book, a 2-volume set on Gisaria by a gentleman named Asheg Alboyajan, and that gives the names probably about 200 of the men who were put on the death marches. So I don't have the names of all the 800. Let's say I think he says there was 800 and some odd of the 1,100 who were tried, were killed. I don't have, but Asheg Alboyajan's book has the names of about 200. And what happened was, I don't know if it's the same Zeki, but there was a gentleman, there was a chief of police who also named Zeki, and I tried to get this into the article. It just never fit anywhere because I couldn't determine if it was the Zeki who was such a brutal killer in the person who was making the decisions. But Zeki went through the prison, and let's say it's this prison here, and the place was teeming with Armenian men were being brought in, and the hangings had begun, and they were hanging maybe 4 or 5 a day. First day they hanged 11, second day they hanged 1, 2 weeks later they hanged 10. So the prison, yet they kept on trying these armies, they're capturing these men and they're throwing them in the prison. Zeki walks through the prison. It may be the police chief, it may be the district governor, I don't know. And Zeki, just with a wave, he says, get rid of them. Just with a wave, get rid of them. And that's how the caravans started. And the caravans began in early July. So in June, the hangings begin. The prison starts overflowing with Armenians, and Zeki, whether it's the police chief responsible for extraordinary torturing of the Armenians at the police station to get them to confess that they were members of this political organization, or they had weapons. And they were driving nails, bastonado with the soles of their feet, driving nails into their feet to get them to talk. Just horrendous things going on. And then Zeki says, just get rid of them. And that's how the caravan started. And those caravans are described in El Boyajan's book, and probably about the names of 200 of them are in the book. But this effort, this effort was wretched to the stuff that Api was finding translation for. But at a certain point, when I started to reach out to people, I realized that there was another goal there beyond the brutality, to detail the brutality, and that was to find that these men had families who had survived them, and I was telling them about their lives, and they were telling me about their hopes, how their seeds had taken place, and we're giving blossom here in our other places. One last question, okay? Thank you.
Or not?
Thank you. Given what I'm seeing, as a lot of us would know, the deviousness, the scheming of the Turkish officials. When you mentioned...
I like to say Ottoman.
Ottoman, okay. Okay, Ottoman, Young Turk, whatever. That initially they weren't allowed to have guns.
Yeah.
The Young Turks took over. I noticed this as you were saying, and I sat here and I thought that was intentional. For them to allow people to have guns and weapons,
yeah,
I'm guessing would have allowed them to start to do this eventually. And I'm
not the historian, I should be, but I don't think so, but that's fine.
Because that would give them open door right to go in.
Right.
And so the scheming of how they could round up these people and find whatever reasons they could find to just say, okay, you're out of here, you're done. Right. That's, to me, is horrific. Just
well, on the charge of being a member of the Tashnagla, the Hunchak Party, they said by being a member they had a secret meeting in 1914 in Bucharest. One of the parties did not have, and at that secret meeting they had formed a bond of rebellion. One of the parties hadn't. There was no meeting. One of the two parties. The other party had met, but there was no bond. There was no secret agreement for rebellion. So they just trumped up the charge in order to give a verdict that they could sell to their population. In the end, the Turkish, they needed to inflame the Turkish public against the Armenians. The Armenians had bombs, they had guns, and they were seeking rebellion, and that's what caused them to strike against us. And that, you know, that's that history. It's a brutal one, but it's also one that we can come away with a sense of salvation and success. So thank you very much.
Steve, thank you very much. We're scheduling now for in another 9 years. We've got you down. I'm sure there's more still even to learn. as Steve was talking, I was thinking back again over, this is just one location, one place, and there is such overwhelming, actually, amount of sources that are available on Gesaria alone, mostly in the Armenian language, but including memoirs, works of history, documentation, some things in English, and of course Turkish language materials as well. So the amount of work necessary to tell just one story is immense. And I think actually we need more of these local histories that focus in on specific locations and really allow us to zoom in and see what was going on in such and such a place. And so what Steve has done is fairly miraculous, actually, in a lot of ways. And anyway, thank you again, Steve.
Thank you.